Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ross Kay of Ross Kay Realty Consultants. His website, rosskay.com. Welcome to the show, Ross.
And thanks for having me back, Jim. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing great. Wondering, there's another round of low mortgage rates out there right now, and some people are hinting that there could be panic buying, that people think rates will never be so low again. You got to get out there and buy whatever you can lay your hands on. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, that would be the information that's coming from your local real estate agents and the local real estate boards and the banks who want to get you locked into as much debt as possible. I think that's who that's coming from, Jim. There's been a myth that's been common and proliferated from the banks for years now, that lower interest rates spur on home buying for fear of the interest rates going up. There is no statistical evidence at all that that has ever taken place. There's as much difference between people going out and rushing out to buy a home today because the interest rate is historically low, as there is that a polar vortex is hovering over BC, and that's why sales were down last month. There is it's just absurd that these folks are getting away with these type of comments. The truth of the matter is, the entire real estate structure is fundamentally fed by first-time buyers. So without a first-time buyer entering any real estate marketplace, whether that's Vancouver or Calgary or Newfoundland, if you don't have first-time buyers looking to acquire property, that means that the sales further up the sales chain cannot take place. In other words, I live in a condominium. Unless a first-time buyer comes along and wants to buy my condominium, I can't sell it and then go out and buy a small detached home. The person in that small detached home then has lost the sale, so he's not or she's not able to go out and buy a large detached home, and so on and so forth. So these comments about interest rates, the only place that they're applicable is how much a first-time buyer will pay for a property. Now, in Canada last year, only 22.9% of all sales that took place were as a result of first-time purchases. So that just goes to show you how slow the market was in terms of first-time buyers. Now, the question is why is the market so low for first-time buyers when the interest rates are as low as they are? Well, the fact of the matter is first-time buyers generally don't make a heck of a lot of money. They're at their early years of their adult employment and earning years, so they only have a certain amount of income. That certain amount of income only qualifies them for a certain amount of mortgage. That certain amount of mortgage will only allow them to buy a certain home. So that's what's called first-time purchases. At Ross Kay Realty Consultants, we do a calculation for every market in Canada, and that's called the initial acquisition threshold. Now, what the initial acquisition threshold is, it's a big term to say, what's the maximum purchase price first-time buyers in a local real estate market are willing and financially able to acquire? What is the maximum price first-time buyers are currently paying in our marketplace for real estate? Now, in Canada, what that means is that the maximum purchase price where Canadians stop buying their first-time purchase is about $244,000. The actual number is $243,920. Now, at that purchase price, they require a minimum income of $51,000 to buy that first-time purchase. If they don't make that much money, they can't buy the house. Now, and that's also assuming they don't have a lot of outside debt. You know, they don't have $10,000 on a credit card. They didn't go out and buy a brand new pickup truck that costs $50,000 and they have a $700 a month payment on that pickup truck. This is people who just have regular expenses, but they still require $51,000 to buy at that top initial acquisition price in Canada. Now, if you go to Vancouver, the initial acquisition, so the threshold, the maximum price first-time buyers are paying in Vancouver is $440,000. The monthly payment on that mortgage is $2,277, or approximately $1,000 more per month than what they're paying in the Canadian average. So when you hear bankers talking about interest rates dropping 0.5%, or interest rates for 5 years dropping 0.2% or 0.25%, the truth of the matter is we have already reached an affordability limit. So even if interest rates were to drop 0.25%, as you know we're talking about now on a 5-year term, this most recent surge, that still only means the initial acquisition threshold may increase by a couple of $1,000s. So it has zero bearing on what's happening in the real estate marketplace. Now, that doesn't mean that your listeners shouldn't take advantage of these historically low rates, but they shouldn't take advantage of them the way the banks want you to. Odds are, I think pretty much universally, from the Bank of Canada on down, they say that there's some form of a house price correction that's coming forward. And based on how slow the market is across Canada and how slow it has been the last couple of years, and based on all the other variables that we measure, that's basically a certainty. So how do you protect yourselves in that situation? Well, let's see. I think I can go out right now and I can get a historically low 10-year term for my mortgage. If I'm a homeowner, the way that I take advantage of these low interest rates is by going out and renegotiating my own mortgage for a 10-year term. Because the beautiful thing about mortgages in Canada is after 5 years, your mortgage automatically becomes open anyway. So why not go ahead and remove all the risk that you have in your mortgage right now, you remove all the risk, the equity gain in your property in the last few years by simply going out and renewing your mortgage with a 10-year term at the historically low interest rates that are out there. What you don't want to do is use the propaganda that's out there that this is the reason you should go out and buy a house, or that you should go out and buy a larger home, or that you should go out and buy a more expensive home, or that you should run out and give your kids $100,000 so they can buy a home. That's the last thing that you want to do. The only thing these interest rates benefit are current homeowners who are smart enough and go ahead and renew their mortgages with a 10-year term, and they pay the little bit higher interest rate because it's a 10-year term, say, versus a variable. And that little bit extra that they're paying, that's the cost they have to protect themselves for 10 years.
Did you know the Canadian government thought you might be a terrorist if you bought or even looked at real estate in Canada? We'll discuss that with Ross Kay right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking to Ross Kay of Ross Kay Realty Consultants. Ross, you were telling me that if you bought real estate in Canada in the last few years, the Canadian government had you investigated as a possible terrorist?
Yeah, and I was surprised that more of the press has not picked up on this, especially with the events recently in terms of the government asking for new powers for CSIS and the RCMP in terms of investigating Canadians for terrorist acts. Since 2008, that means for about 10 million Canadians, they were investigated by their realtor to determine whether or not they posed a terrorist threat to the nation. The realtor had to complete what's called a FINTRAC form, and it's a form that's created by the government to make sure that criminal activities are not laundering money by buying real estate. Now, in our country, there's, it's like such a minuscule amount of that ever took place. It didn't impact anybody. But the consequences of that form is that if you suspected any terrorist activity from a seller or buyer of real estate, the realtor, under penalty of going to jail, had to report that to the RCMP. All of those 10 million Canadians, their information has all been collected, placed on a piece of paper. Whether or not the realtor believed they were a terrorist or not was checked off, and those records are all now being stored in real estate offices across Canada. The problem that I have with it, I have no problem with the form being done for the sake it was originally created. But the problem that I have is that the people getting these forms done are never told that it's the realtor's responsibility to determine whether or not they're a terrorist or not. In other words, all of those people were investigated, and someone with no training, not a police officer, someone who's never taken a course, they've never done anything at all about determining whether or not someone's a terrorist, has made a judgment call on all those Canadians. Those judgment calls are recorded on paper, have been stored, and are legally required to be stored and accessible by the government simply upon the government's request at any time. So I would be interested to know how many of your listeners have purchased a home since 2008 or listed a home since 2008, and the realtor informed them that they were going to determine whether or not they posed a terrorist threat to the nation. So when I hear these statements in the press going on about talking about these few extra powers are being granted to the RCMP and CSIS, I laugh, because I think if people were aware that realtors are out there assessing the terrorist threat of the nation, they're recording it in writing, they're storing and keeping those documents on file under the threat of jail time if they don't do it, I think the Canadian press would be a little more interested. It would be a far major story than what we're complaining about today.
I haven't seen a badge on a real estate agent.
Well, when this form first came out in 2008, I was still a realtor, and what I can tell you is they supplied us with the forms. They told us we had to fill it out. They showed us a couple pieces of ID that we had to check and how we had to write the ID, and how they told us it was a brochure. But they never provided us with any training for telltale signs on defining a terrorist activity, defining a terrorist bank account. But I was legally responsible for making that assessment, and if I thought there was a terrorist, I had to report it to the government. So the question what we have is, what about in our neighborhoods where there's a high new immigrant population? Those people we're immigrants, generally there's about a 5 to 7 year window before they start to acquire real estate. So anybody who immigrated here since 2008 and now is ready to go and buy a house, they're going to have a realtor complete a terrorist threat assessment about their person. And if that realtor, for whatever reason, even if the realtor is a bigot or a racist, or they simply don't like the community that this particular person is coming from, and I'm not saying that this is what would happen, but I'm saying, technically speaking, all that realtor has to do is report that person as a terrorist threat with their FINTRAC form. That form then forwarded to the government, and let your investigations begin. So how many of your listeners who purchased a home since 2008 had a realtor who was honest enough with them to explain to them what they were doing when they were completing those FINTRAC forms? I can tell you in my marketplace, while I was doing it, every single one of my clients knew what I was doing, what information I was writing down, and the fact that I had to say whether or not they were a terrorist. I do not know of another realtor who was doing the same thing that I was doing at that time.
Well, you're supposed to question your clients about their political associations?
No, you're supposed to make a judgment call. You're supposed to think, hey, this bank, they're getting the money from this down payment from their mother. These people have only been in Canada 5 years. I wonder if this money is really coming from is really a gift, or if it was coming somewhere else. Or a house that is owned by someone is just sold, and those people didn't purchase another home. In other words, all they did is they liquidated their equity out of their real estate investment. Okay, I think rationally speaking, if that person had a family and they're not buying another real estate, I think most realtors would wonder, what the heck's going on here? Why are these folks just selling their house? Why are they not buying another one? That's a red flag, isn't it? I would think it would be a red flag. And, I'm non-judgmental. But I think, that would make me question, based on my experience selling houses for 25 years, it's very unusual for someone just to cash out of their house and the money go into a bank account, for it not to go into another house or maybe pay off a big medical bill, or for the family to pack up and move to another country. Those are possibilities. But just to simply sell their real estate and pack up and take the cash out, and what if this is people who come from the general vicinity of where our biggest terrorist threats are right now? Are those people getting singled out? I don't think that they are, but the fact of the matter is, these checks are being done. And as far as I can see, and I've Googled this, I was involved in the process. I was involved in when it became a legal requirement of every real estate deal in Canada. I don't see this information anywhere on the internet. I don't see any education of home buyers, home sellers taking place. Hey, your realtor's going to assess you whether or not you're a terrorist. I know how absurd that sounds, but even though it's absurd, I still think there should be some information somewhere that tells Canadians, hey, you're going to buy a house, your realtor's going to determine if you're a terrorist or not.
Amazing. Well, I'll look at real estate agents with a whole lot more respect, knowing the power they have now.
Well, it's, the flip side of this, Jim, like in all fairness, because this is where the Canadian Real Estate Association and the real estate boards have really harmed the lowly realtor. The regular real estate agent out there who's trying to do a good job for his client. When you allow these things to go on and you don't inform the public, the realtor is the one left holding the bag. It's not the associations. It's not the local real estate board. As a matter of fact, those people, they aren't legally required to do any of this documentation because they're not licensed to trade in real estate. But the lowly realtor, the guy who's trying to make, or the girl who's trying to make a livelihood for their family. Now, you got to remember, the average realtor in Canada only sold 3 houses last year. So it's not like they're rolling in the cash. Those lowly realtors are standing out there doing this, and nobody's there backing them up. No one's out there supplying the education to the public. Hey, we want you to know that realtors last year spent 1.5 million hours. Last year alone, Jim, 1.5 million hours of their time completing terrorist checks on the FINTRAC forms in Canada. Even at $50 an hour, that means realtors spent $75 million of their money doing terrorist checks for the government. They were not compensated one iota. On the contrary, if they did it wrong or they failed to do it, they could go to jail. This is the law. So I think this is the case where why has not the Greater Vancouver Real Estate Board or the British Columbia Real Estate Council or the Canadian Real Estate Association or the Okanagan Mainland Real Estate Board come out and tell the consumers, look, this is what our realtors are doing. This is what the government has asked them to do. If they don't do it, they're going to go to jail. That means they've donated this much money to fight terrorist threats in the country. Even though it's absurd as it sounds, realtors donated $75 million of their time to investigating terrorist threats in Canada last year. That is a staggering number.
So that they get little gizmos to listen in on their clients or things like that?
Nope. They've been told nothing. They've been given no training. They have not even been giving a list of telltale signs that would signal something. What it means is that, in my case, I sold a young couple a house back in the 1980s. 30 years later, I'm selling that young couple's kids their first house. I've known that family for 30 years. I still know the third generation, possibly the fourth generation of their family has lived here in Canada. I am doing a terrorist check on those people.
We'd be outraged if anybody else on the street was doing that.
So why has the press not picked this up? What I'm saying, obviously, it sounds ludicrous. It sounds absurd. It sounds like I'm nuts. All you have to do is go to the FINTRAC reporting. All you have to do is call your local member of parliament. All you have to do is call your local newspaper and ask them if this is true or not, because it's the law. It's the truth. Every single real estate deal that's been done in Canada by a realtor since the year 2008, both the buyer and the seller were investigated by the realtor, and a form was completed saying that they were okay and the money that was changing hands for the purposes of that real estate deal. It was not going to be used to fund terrorism. It was not going to be used to fund a crime in our country. That's exactly what has gone on since 2008. So instead of people being worried about CSIS and the RCMP getting a little bit of extra investigative powers, they better be more concerned of the personal investigations that are taking place when they buy and sell real estate. And they should be aware of it so they can simply contact their member of parliament and say, is this really going on? You know, how long are these forms going to be kept for? What kind of security is in place to make sure that those forms don't get into the public? If those forms get into the public, into the public space, if Big Data was ever to get a hold of these forms, what does that mean to me? You have the Bank of Canada, you have CMHC asking how many foreign buyers how many foreign purchases are buying real estate in Vancouver. You're hearing the government, the Bank of Canada, and CMHC all saying, we don't know. Well, why don't they know? Every single real estate deal that's gone down in Canada has a FINTRAC form completed, and that FINTRAC form says whether or not the people are Canadians. It says what bank they do business with. It says where the check came from to acquire real estate. And it says that the real estate agent has already vetted them. That means if they come from another country, it's a red flag. If they're a foreign purchaser, that is a red flag, I would think, by any RCMP or CSIS officer's definition. I'm just guessing. To me, it just seems obvious that would be a red flag. So all of those things should have been reported to the government. And if they weren't reported, all of those realtors are in threat of going to jail right now. All of them. This is Canadian law. You can't get around it. It is the law. And it's a serious law because it's got to do with crime and terrorism. This is not something that they should be joking around with. The Bank of Canada, CMHC, the British Columbia government, they should know exactly to the single purchase how many sales took place in Vancouver last year that were foreign buyers. And if they don't, there's something wrong. And that's why foreign buyers are a myth.
Ross, always fun talking to you. We find out something new every time.
That's what the job's for.
Thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Thanks, Jim. You have a good day.
You've been listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet or check out our popular YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.